So we're back on with Potter's or Potter's Packages or Passages number 4, and we're back with Miss Sarah Miller and Mr. Wesley Schantz. Welcome to you two. Welcome back.
Hello.
Greetings.
Good to hear from all of you. And it's funny because we were supposed to talk about chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11 at my suggestion, no less. 8, the Potions Master; 9, the Midnight Duel; 10, Halloween; 11, Quidditch. And I happened not to finish chapter 11, even though we've all read these books many times. I wanted to read them closely, and I didn't get a chance to. And so I had to beg for mercy from you two. I had to beg for y'all to give me the opportunity to read the chapters later and catch up on the homework. And what's sort of interesting and funny about that is it's like I'm attempting my best Harry Potter there, because in these chapters specifically, he seems to require quite a bit of mercy from those he's engaged with, not only his sort of friends or soon to be friends like Hermione, but also from the administration itself, and particularly from Minerva McGonagall, who twice has the opportunity seemingly to expel him, but instead rewards him, which earns him some derision from Hermione. So now you think you're being rewarded for misbehavior? And I just thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And so before we were all talking, I know that you had said, Sarah, that you were very interested in the narrator. You said that you thought that the narrator was adding quite a bit to these chapters, that she seemed witty, funny.
Yeah. There were a lot of moments where it seems like the narrator really adds or interjects like a layer of like wry British humor. I don't know how to describe it any better, but there were just so many times, I think maybe because they're finally in the throes of school and it feels like they are kind of in a routine of sorts, and that we're being further immersed in the world, that there were moments where as I was reading, I would draw a smiley face on the side if it made me laugh, which is impressive because I've read this before. So the fact that something could still make me laugh is really good writing. When they're first learning to fly, for example, and they're all talking about how great they are at flying, even though they're probably all lying. And the narrator tells us that Neville had never been on a broomstick because his grandmother had never let him near one. Privately, Harry felt she had a good reason, because Neville managed to have an extraordinary number of accidents, even with both feet on the ground. And like we've seen a couple, but it's a funny way of saying that. To me, at least, it was funny.
And there is a lot of it. Just looking at page 152, I see he felt particularly hungry after the excitement of the afternoon. Or Ron was so amazed, so impressed, he just sat and gaped at Harry. Or Malfoy looked at Crabbe and Goyle, sizing them up. So you're really right that the narrative structure isn't just dialogue.
Yeah.
That a lot is explained by the narrator between the dialogue, explains the reactions and sort of how the characters are framing their perceptions in those moments. It's almost as if what the narrator provides is like such a perfect frame for the moment that it is immediately universally connectable or something like
that. Yeah, like even after, like the next day after their midnight duel, after they almost get caught, indeed, by the next morning, Harry and Ron thought that meeting the three-headed dog had been an excellent adventure, and they were quite keen to have another one. It's almost as though I can hear, like your crazy grandma or your crazy grandpa telling the story, and that's something that like a lot of fantasy literature has as a characteristic, that it has like an oral quality to it, which reminds me, of course, of like epic poems, that there's somebody who is telling us the story, and who's giving us pieces of the story that the characters themselves aren't giving or aren't aware of, which I think is pretty great.
It's
And
almost like the muse is speaking through it, and so it is being presented in an ideal fashion. The muse is speaking through J.K. Rowling, or the narrator is sort of that divine consciousness that knows the nuances of a situation that helps to bring them out. Sort of
yeah,
like we're sipping the coffee, and it's the person that tells us the notes that we're tasting. Uh,
yeah, like they make something, the narrator is making something even funnier than it would be, I think, like for like also when they Neville had somehow managed to melt Seamus's cauldron into a twisted blob, and they're pushing the seeping across the stone floor. You know, like of course, then like every story has a narrator, but just it, the narrator sometimes seems to be like seeing it with us, and like narrating what they see in a way that's witty, or to me it smacks of British wryness, like making something smaller if it's a really big deal, or making a big deal out of something small. I like that.
It seems to be something of an answer to the old koan, the Buddhist koan, if a tree falls in the forest, doesn't make a sound, because it's almost as if the delivery of the message is connected to the personality which delivers it. And the personality is that which focuses our attention on specific aspects. And so it's like we wouldn't even receive or see the story in the same way if the personality sharing with us weren't constituted in such a way as to be attentive to those aspects.
Mm-hmm.
As if because of how the narrator or J.K. Rowling or the muse speaking through her sees the world, that we see the world in that way and we find it so pleasant. Because we don't see the world exactly as she does, though we can understand how she does see the world when she presents it to us in an articulated fashion. But I want to pause on that for 1 second, because when we first started, I know that we all took we decided the sorts of characters that we would be like, and I recall that Wes not only said that he was a Hufflepuff, and I do want to ask you about that existential crisis you had over the last week, thinking about which house you were in, Sarah, Hufflepuff or Gryffindor. And I know you've done some work on this, and you shared this with me earlier, and the listeners just have to hear. But Wes, our guy Neville, the guy you identified with the most, he's had a tough few chapters. He's getting locked out of the Gryffindor common room. He can't remember anything and doesn't have his remember all to help him. Picked on by Malfoy, and he's getting on a broom for the first time, and it's dropping him on the ground, and he's the first person we see get with serious consequences, that there are serious consequences at this magical school. And then he has to go see this Cerberus like Fluffy, and I just wondered, we start to get these differentiations of characters. We have a Neville now who seems to have a specific personality. We have a Draco Malfoy. We have a Hermione. But I guess I wanted to focus on Neville some, and what is it that we're seeing with him exactly? Why are we getting this consistent introduction to his sort of bumbling behavior, though he happens to be in Gryffindor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he seems to me to be a kind of shadow of Harry. They're born on the same day, we find out later. And I totally identify with Neville in a lot of ways. His remember all is cool because it only lets him know that he has forgotten something, not what he has forgotten. So it's a great image of the kind of Socratic moment of aporia, right? Like, I know that I don't know, and the bottom falls out, and so what do I do now? And that's a great image for learning and teaching. And I think these chapters for me is where the story picks up, because we're finally at Hogwarts, and we see what a school could be like, and maybe what school is like if you have the right perspective on it, this kind of wry, playful, and serious at the same time way of seeing the world that the narrator kind of demonstrates for us. We see, like you say, all the characters come into their own, and the ways that Neville does this. I mean, so in some ways, Harry recognizes the importance of Malfoy for his success here, right? If Malfoy hadn't stolen the Remembrall, he wouldn't have gotten picked for the Quidditch team. But it's also because of Neville's forgetfulness and his going up on the broom and falling and having to be taken to the infirmary. That's also crucial. And Neville's participation in these events, though small, when you go back and read it again, you can really pick up that he's in some ways like the most important character in this book. You know, I just love Neville. Yeah, he's the best.
Well, yeah, and that is interesting. That it seems as if you're going to be the hero, you have to have the impediments. Even characters within your own stories will serve as obstacles or impediments, but they're necessary constituents of your story if you want to be a hero, because you have to be the sort of person who overcomes tremendous obstacles. And in fact, we got a foreshadowing of the ultimate obstacle, right, with this three-headed dog, but also because of Neville's bumbling, because he can't settle his own fights. Someone often has to step in to help him, whether it be Hermione on the train to help him find his rat, or
Toad.
not his rat, his toad, Trevor the toad, excuse me, and or in this case where he can't defend himself against Malfoy, Harry has to. And in fact, people speak out on Harry's behalf when McGonagall shows up, saying no, it's not his fault. Because he broke the rule, but he obeyed a deeper rule, which is fight for good rather than evil. But one point you said, which I wanted to hone in on, is how a school can be and how things move along once you're at the school, because this is something that actually Harry notices. He hadn't even noticed it had been 2 months and that it was Halloween at this school because he seemed to love it so much. And also, I just wanted to bring up the fact that the corridors, or not only do the paintings move, or the characters within the paintings, but the stairways move as well. So the environment, so the school models the environment, not only in terms of showing the sky above the Great Hall, but also in terms of ever shifting around the students. So they have to be figuring out how to get to their, the means that they have to utilize in order to get to their goals are constantly changing. And so that's very deeply interesting. And we get our first introduction to the game of Quidditch. Its rules, it's 3 positions, and it's 3 sorts of balls, and just how it works. Which is, again, just to your point, that's one of the fun aspects of school, one of the elements of recreation.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I found the easily the most boring class was the history of magic, which was the only one taught by a ghost. Professor Binns had been very old indeed when he had fallen asleep in front of the staff room fire and got up next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Binns droned on and on while they scribbled down names and dates and got Emmerich the evil and Ulrich the oddball mixed up. And so we see that there is still like the boring school class, which is the history of magic, which sounds like the coolest class because there's like clearly these vital stories there. One day in the far future, Harry Potter's own story will be taught to the kids in history of magic, and they'll think it's just as boring, right, as long as Binns is teaching it. And the same goes for the defense against the dark arts, right? Like everyone's looking forward to defense against the dark arts, but Quirrell's lessons turned out to be a bit of a joke, right? So there's so much emphasis on like you say, the personalities that that kind of bring this place to life, as well as the place itself being dynamic and moving and constantly mysterious, things revealed and then concealed again. So yeah,
that's
great.
True and interesting because we're all teachers, and something I noticed this time around, besides the fact that I love almost everything that Hermione says and that she thinks things through, and I can see why that would be so annoying to young boys. Like when she says to them in that when she stays up late at night to keep them from sneaking out, knowing that they would try to sneak out in order to lecture them that they will lose all the hard-earned points that she won. It's like she's a winner. She's a winner. She's smart. She understands that is an egocentric thing for Harry to do. There are no points that he can possibly win in the game, in the Hogwarts House Cup game. He can win maybe personal ego points, but she is correct to point out to him that this is a foolish thing to do, which will most likely result in failure. And the only reason that it doesn't result in massive, complete failure is because of her.
Right.
And so but the thing that I noticed that I thought was so interesting is that Snape is described, like McGonagall, as not having to do anything in order to control his classroom.
Can I ask, as a teacher, I mean, we're all teachers. Did you guys see any? I mean, did you recognize any of your self in any of these teachers? I mean, like that. Like when the first time Malfoy took the Remember All wasn't on the Quidditch pitch. It was like in some courtyard or some plaza, and McGonagall walks by and she says, is there anything, like, what's the trouble? And the way that the narrator described her is Professor McGonagall, who could spot trouble quicker than any teacher in the school, was there in a flash. And
Yes.
and I just, like, maybe it's just because I'm finishing up 8 years at an all boys school, but I feel like that was I had to be. I mean, like, that was me in my classroom. Like, you could see it brewing, and you nip that in the bud, right? Like,
Yep.
And I'm sure we all have our own tactics for that. Like, obviously Snape just, like, bullies his students, but like, but the thing is like, I know teachers like who are sort of Snape like, who are like mean to students, and said like, oh, you thought that was impressive? Well, it's not. Sit down and shut up. Like, right. That's not a lie to say that. It would be to say that I've heard that before in the classroom of someone else. Like, so I'm just curious if there's anything like that just struck you as, wow, that seems awfully real.
Well, yeah, Wes, what do you think? I definitely have some connections here.
Well, I mean, I'm obviously most like Bins, but I'm also a bit like Flitwick, because I'm actually a substitute teacher now. So most of what I do is just call roll. And so Flitwick standing on the pile of books, that's me. I'm not smart, but I've read a lot of books. So I'm standing on a pile of books to see over the desk, and I get to the roll call, and I topple out of sight when I get a bit. Yeah. So that's totally me. Yeah, Flitwick all the way.
Yeah, I would say I have some Snape-like qualities in that I keep my room under control, and I like to give poetic speeches like he does in the beginning about brewing power if they have and also having little aristocratic sayings, and they're like, if you have the skill to learn this subtle art, not hiding the fact that mastery of the material I teach is nearly impossible and almost nobody achieves it, but trying to lay out the game for the students in a sophisticated way. To be like, okay, well, you've played some video games and you've taken some classes and read some books before. Welcome to the real game. Mm-hmm. And also I would say I have a degree of McGonagall, in just that, I think that she and Snape have a lot of qualities in common. They do both deeply care about things. She doesn't seem to bully students in the same way that Snape does, or show favoritism. She seems to be a more fair or a more just teacher, not just picking students out and asking them questions surely they would not know, but also that she like Snape has a certain regard for just how serious magic is. She seems to see the end of these lessons. It's not just about performing in front of them or getting through a class, but that they may be one day fighting against Voldemort or some other great, powerful.
But you notice, you notice that when they take on the troll, it's the charm that saves the day. So
yeah,
it's the Wingardium Leviosa. Yes.
So I was just gonna say, Alex, earlier at the beginning, you mentioned how we were merciful to you, and how like Harry needed mercy, and then you mentioned the word just, that McGonagall is a very just teacher, and I guess I'm curious about the use of those two words, because most schools are bound by a set of rules, codes of conduct for student behavior and teacher behavior, and Harry broke the rule, but by getting on his broomstick and flying around when Madame Hooch wasn't there, he fundamentally broke a rule. But she chooses to go find Oliver Wood and say, like, instead of caring so much about the rule, she sees like the skill behind the rule breaking. And I think also, like, I don't know, from my experience teaching all boys, like, I think it makes a lot of sense to me. And I know I've done it before, where a kid breaks a rule or fails to live up to a standard, but in that quote unquote failure or breaking of something, it actually opens up something much bigger, and like you get to see, oh wow, maybe this kid has this really awesome skill or passion, and like, how can I move that in some right direction for his good. Like, it seems to me that like that's a kind of radical mercy when it comes to the rules, but it's also a kind of justice when it comes to like what education is about. Like, not every kid's going to be a great flyer, not every kid's going to be a great potions master, so helping them figure out what is their best place, even if it means breaking a couple rules. I guess I'm just curious, like, what do you mean when you use those words, and do you think like
well, I think she has a good balance of justice and fairness.
Okay.
If you consider those the two poles of discipline, and that justice is giving somebody what they deserve,
Right.
whether they've done something good or bad, and not sparing them the rod, as it were. I think she's good at that, but also knowing when not to be simply just, but to be merciful, because people, of course, are weak-willed and sinful, and young people in particular don't even know all the nuances of the rules or all the rules themselves.
But
And so, well, one thing I think she recognizes is the sort of meta rules, the rules not simply of the school and institution, but the rules of human development and of human character. So what she rewards Harry for, she rewards him for his bravery at first, and his skill and dexterity. And what you seem to hit on, that she hits on, is that she sees that he has a natural fire, that he has a gift that other people do not have, that requires that it be tended to in a unique way. But something interesting, I think, about that is that she's not, even when Harry does extraordinary things like help to defeat the troll, though it is really Ron I would give the majority of the credit to, though Harry has the initial brave act of jumping on its back, the brave and stupid act.
Right.
But what Harry's not rewarded in the same way that Hermione is rewarded by the institution. Rather than winning lots of points, he only ends up winning 5 points total, but he's becoming a hero in our eyes. And so he's winning the much bigger game that's not necessarily institutionally rewarded. And just 2 notes about Minerva McGonagall being Athena. 1, she takes Harry to a guy named Oliver Wood. Olive Wood. The olive tree is what Minerva or Athena gave to the Athenians to defeat the gift of Poseidon of the horse, in order to, or the fountain, in order to win the name of Athens. And also she sends an owl, the animal of Athena, with a message to Harry Potter telling him when he will first practice on the Quidditch field. And I know that owls are always sent as messengers, but it's funny that she sends him a letter by message, and it is an owl, and it's telling him to go to be with Oliver Wood. Yeah, I digress. Sorry.
No, that's great. That's great. No, I was just gonna say, I think he learns more in, or like, I guess maybe my question might be more about education than it is about Harry Potter. But do you think it's better to be like, I don't know, what do you think is a better educational tactic, being merciful or being just? Or is it a kind of a balance of the two? Because it really, I mean, what she opens up for him by bringing him to Oliver Wood or Olive Wood is something so much grander than like detention ever would, right? Like detention is what he deserves, or maybe even expulsion is what he deserves. Like, do you think that mercy is a better tactic, or do you think that this story is maybe presenting that as mercy is like a way that you learn more, or I don't know.
Well, Wes, why don't you start with that, and then maybe I can add something.
Sure. Yeah, I think the point that we seem to be seeing here is like the school is this kind of environment within which there are some rules, and there's also some nested layers of them. There's also some games, right? So there's like this kind of positive reinforcement of getting points and playing Quidditch, and of course the intrinsic value of like learning so that you don't walk in the wrong corridor and get eaten by Fluffy, right? Like, it's pretty clear that you wanna stay on top of all of that. So the environment itself seems super important, and the rules and boundaries and the leading points, games, things that it does to draw you out. All of that seems to operate within a system that you might call justice. But then the mercy, I think, is embodied in the characters a lot more, the individuals, like we were pointing out, the personalities, including the narrator herself, right? So she can give this kind of even-handed portrayal of Harry as brave and stupid as he makes the leap and sticks his wand up the nose of the troll, right? But at the same time, the ultimate moral of that chapter is like, this is how you make friends. You lock them in the
Yeah.
bathroom and then you rescue them from the troll. Like, now you're friends. So mercy has to do with, I think, seeing people as personalities, the flaws and the good side of it, and embracing that all within the kind of larger category of friendship and what it's
and
all about.
just to agree with that, it's if you look from both the punishing perspective of McGonagall or the rewarding perspective, in terms of giving the Nimbus 2000 as well as 5 points to Ron and Harry, as well as the action of Harry and Ron, you see that what has to mitigate between justice and mercy, you can't simply apply the rules as they are from a traditional perspective, because it's a novel situation with novel intentions and actions that have happened within it. So you have to use the logos. You have to take the factors of the situation into account, weigh them, and give your own arbitrated decision. And so what seems to be the ultimate thing that a good educator can do is to effectively wield the conscious mind, or the logos, or the rational intellect, in order to appropriately apply justice or mercy to a specific novel situation in the same way. And I think that befits the action of Harry and Ron, who themselves had to use their minds, had to make a conscious decision what they did, right? First and foremost, they went to save Hermione at great risk to themselves and her. Then they tried to save everybody from the troll. Then they realized that they were going to sacrifice the one for the many, and they were unwilling to do that. They did a sort of a very Christian thing in that moment, right? Rather than sacrificing Hermione alone for everyone else, which Hermione might have even agreed would have been the intelligent thing to do, right? Instead of sacrificing two of them even for one of her, they went in there and they attempted to get its attention off her because they felt bad, because they felt themselves at fault for her being there in the first place, which I guess adds an additional wrinkle to the situation. But it's almost as if using the logos is brave, but does not guarantee safety. That you have to use your conscious mind when you're in a new situation you can recognize as new, and you don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be, but in order to get the best outcome, you have to use your head. You have to generate a new solution. And it's almost as if that is what McGonagall mirrors in Harry and Ron, in giving them that seemingly magical, completely unexpected, for the second time in a couple chapters, solution, right? Because for the second time in a row, we see where you should be punished according to the rules, potentially even in a major way, expulsion. We see a minor reward being given, or maybe even major reward, if you consider getting 5 points in the House Cup much better than being expelled. Which it's funny that Harry actually went through the whole imaginative consequences of getting expelled, perhaps being Hagrid's assistant, and watching Ron and Hermione all become wizards, and he felt how sick that would make him be. And it's like, well, I wonder if that's how Hagrid felt as well. But that's my sort of long-winded answer to, I think you have to probably through experience and skill use logos or use consciousness in order to appropriately apply mercy or justice, and that I see McGonagall as a fairly ideal ability to do that. And in fact, in the next book, I think, well, that's something Albus Dumbledore will say, right? Snape will say, if I had the ability to expel you, I would. And Dumbledore will say, well, then it's a good thing it's not your decision. So, Wes, before we got on, you were saying that there are two characters in particular that you notice who want to make an impression on Harry, or want to make an impression on the world, and you were noticing Hermione as well as Draco, but then they had differing methods by which they wish to gain their fame or their reputation, as it were.
Yeah, so reading it again and again, get this kind of idea of the kind of larger patterns that Rowling or the narrator's playing with here. So looking at, like we did already, Snape and McGonagall, you can see how they're sort of parallels to each other in some ways. And I think that Draco Malfoy and Neville, I compared already how they're sort of driving the plot in these chapters, but I think you can also compare Malfoy and Longbottom in a similar fashion. Or sorry, not Longbottom, Granger, Hermione. You can compare them too because they both want to get the attention of Harry. They seem to want to constantly pester him and let him know that they're there and they're available to be friends or to be played with and joked around with, and they do it in opposite ways. Malfoy through overt conflict and Hermione through trying to be helpful all the time, right? Trying to like do what's best for them. And it's interesting that they don't really seem to get it in either respect, right? And the story just sort of plays out where rather than being won over to Draco and his nefarious play, they're instead won over to Hermione and her self-sacrificing. And I think that's, again, like sort of a pretty blunt moral lesson that's spelled out there at the end of Halloween chapter.
And what's interesting is it seems to be the lessons that both Draco and Hermione learn from the actions of Harry seem to be different on account of that too. Whereas Draco experiences the explicit horror of seeing his entrapment not work on Harry and in fact blow up in his face. In fact, multiple times he's tried to entrap Harry. For one, he got on the broom, threw the Remember All, tried to get him expelled, thought he got him expelled. For two, he invited him to a duel, told Argus Filch, remember Argos is the creature with infinite eyes that guards Io as a cow. And Argus Filch and Filch means to steal. And so he, with Mrs. Norris, is tipped off to Harry's location. Again, Harry should get expelled. And then Harry should get killed by Fluffy, but Hermione helps with that. And so when Draco sees that Harry has received a broom, he tries to get Professor Flitwick to show that, or he tries to get Harry in trouble by telling Flitwick that a first year has a broom, which they're not allowed to have. And Flitwick shows that he knows about these special circumstances, is very happy. And then, in fact, Harry says, yeah, it's thanks to Draco. And then Draco realizes with horror what's happening, that Harry, it may be an initial realization, but what he realizes is his place in the story is opponent who fails against hero, and his mouth is gaping open. Whereas Hermione, she bends a little, right? Even though at first it seems like she might be one of those bookish sorts who's just good at school. No, she's highly competent. She helps the boys. She knows how to unlock the door to get them into Fluffy's lair. She also is the one that notices that there's a trap door under Fluffy. And then she's the one who risks her reputation and points and entrance into this magical world, because if she gets expelled, she's gone from the magical world totally because of her muggle parents, in order to help these boys. It's as if she breaks out of her initial category because of her exposure to the heroic, and starts to develop her own heroic path too. She seems to, in a way, for me, to mirror Harry, that she is now showing her willingness, like McGonagall, like Harry, to go beyond the rules in order to do the right thing. And that, like you said, it seems that doing the right thing for someone else or sacrificing for someone else is at the root of the development of friendship.
Yeah, I like that.
Which is almost like you were saying that there are some games and there's some traditions and some rules at this school, suggesting that the most important thing you learn at school isn't simply the magic, but the magic of developing relationships. That those all act as the sort of specific impediments or constraints that allow you to develop friendship with those around you. Which is, if friendship is that which maintains trust between people, then that is what is at the root of all communities. Suggesting that the great magic is the friendship at Hogwarts. But I don't know if that makes any sense. I'll have to listen back to it afterwards and put my head in my hands stirring. So, what did y'all think about? Oh, and I guess one last thing is I would say, not only Snape and McGonagall. If I'm just jumping back to answering the question about what sort of teacher I'm like, I'd say I'm a little bit like Madam Hooch too, sort of sporty, and I sort of expect the students just to sort of listen and do it. There's a lot of just embodying things in my class without having to articulate them. It's like, okay, say up. Then you get your stick in your hand. Okay, we're going to fly now. It's like, we're not going to get into all the unnecessary details at all the time. Some things you're just going to be expected to do or to learn how to do while we're learning bigger, more important things. Not that I don't focus on fundamentals. I think they're absolutely important, but sometimes I think some things can be taken for granted.
I could pick up on that. I think it's important that Hermione is nervous about this class for that very reason, right? It's not something you can learn in a book. It's not something you can really prepare for. You just have to do it. And I think to your point about her learning from them, I think an important moment there is when she overhears Ron saying, it's no wonder no one can stand her. She's a nightmare, honestly. And so she overhears herself from their perspective. And it really, it wounds her. Like, I don't think that we see quite the same thing with Malfoy, where he does have that moment of realization, but it takes place in a slightly different fashion. It takes place in an agonistic, direct, confrontational fashion.
Well, she
whereas
seems
here
to actually learn from it. She's crying because she thinks it's true, because she's understood what she sacrificed for her position in the dominance hierarchy, as it were. She's the top student, but she's at a lonely top. And
I'm trying to think about, so what would it look like, and maybe just throwing out some ideas, but like, what would it look like to actually educate Draco then? Like, is he redeemable at this point, now that he's got that recognition as well, but it takes place in a different fashion? Is it too late now that he's realized it in the way that he has, or can he similarly be given this kind of dramatic moment of learning? I'm not sure.
Well, Sarah, what do you think?
Well, I know I've asked that question before, even like, are there some like just wholly good or wholly bad characters who are just beyond redemption? To me, kind of related to what you were saying before, Alex, about like, is part of what they're learning, besides, history and biology, all of that, is part of what they're learning, like how to be a member of a team, how to like take care of each other. Certainly in Gryffindor, you start to see like Hermione takes care of Neville, then Harry and Ron.
Care of Neville, sub major.
Yeah, Harry and Ron allow Neville and Hermione to come with them to the midnight duel. Like learning to handle different personalities, and like transform them, as you said, into some kind of community. Like, what kind of magic is that? And is that the magic of the primary world that we can like duplicate? Is the kind of friendship that they learn, And I guess to tie it back to the question of mercy, I really think that like I think that characters, someone like Draco is redeemable through like constant shows of mercy. And the thing about mercy is that it's only mercy if it's undeserving and like kind of freely given. And I think that Harry's too immature to maybe understand, and all of them, none of them are mature enough to understand like anybody else's story. I flip it around. If Snape had come out and seen Malfoy flying around, I bet Harry would have wanted him to be expelled as well, right? Until they grow to a place where they can want something that's good for someone who is not their favorite or an enemy, then I mean, he doesn't really seem to be the kind of person who's redeemable from the perspective of this story with Harry as the hero. I mean, he has to like give and receive mercy in a way that, like, I mean, no, I don't know. I think Harry has like a natural proclivity for it in a way that other characters don't. It's interesting to me that like Ron is I think Ron is way more mean than Harry is, right? Like, I love that line when they're preparing for the duel. Then when Harry says like, well, what if nothing what if I like wave my wand and nothing happens? And Ron's like, well, then like haul off and smack him. Like, Ron seems like way more aggressive. And he's the one who's like, he has no regret for like what he says about Hermione. I don't know.
Yeah, and something about Draco is that he's certainly shown himself to be clever and talented. He can ride a broom. He can figure out how to entrap
and make a potion.
Harry, which is something, again, Hermione notices. He tricked you. She sees the situation for how it is. She's smart. And she sees how Draco is actually smarter and less ethical than Harry there. Perhaps a prefiguration of the differences between Slytherin and Gryffindor, because what we see there is the Gryffindors, like Wes said, joining together as a team and even working through having an incompetent team member that almost ruins everything and tries to take them all down with him, right? We learn a very powerful lesson about teamwork when Neville almost grabs Ron and knocks down the armor, and we all think that same moment in The Hobbit or in the Fellowship of the Rings where Gandalf yells at the hobbits for dropping armor in the myth in the mines of Moria, and we're just like, God, Neville, so incompetent. You don't do anything right. And yet the Gryffindor way is pick him up and keep moving, because if any of you go down, you all go down. Whereas a Slytherin way of looking at that might be to like leave him there and hope he gets expelled and think that that's appropriate or that's fair because he was the one that brought who was incompetent in the situation. But
right. But I think what we'll see eventually is that a real Gryffindor, at the end of the day, like in the final analysis, a real Gryffindor has to be able to pick up a teammate who's not in their house, right? Mm-hmm. Like, or see somebody who's not in their house as a teammate as well. You know what I mean? Like,
and I think Draco can be redeemed, but not from outside, only inside. And I think we'll see this, I think, in book 6.
Yeah.
When he's showing that even he, as a human, can't get away from his sort of moral framework, or his moral sense of life, right? We'll discover him crying several times. And potentially that's for his own skin. And potentially that's also because he doesn't want to do what it is he's tasked to do because he feels that it's immoral. And so I do like the question of whether Draco can be redeemed. And I do like also differentiating the question between, even if he figures as an antagonist, can he still, in his own story, be a protagonist? Or can he redeem himself by consciously accepting his role as antagonistic to Harry and yet still being protagonistic to his own position? Or is he naturally antagonistic?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, just going back to the idea of like mercy, like he, like you said, I think his redemption will come from within, but what we will is that his redemption that does come from within is because he has been treated better by somebody else who he has treated really poorly. Like, you know, like Harry had plenty of opportunities to treat Draco the way Draco treated him. And maybe there were enough in his memory when Harry didn't. And maybe that's just disposition, because maybe the Slytherins are more manipulative, more conniving. I don't know. But I think that internal conversion requires kind of like a series of reflections about your past external interactions. I don't know, that's my sense, but that is, of course, that's getting very much ahead of us, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well,
at this point, he's the guy we're supposed to hate, I think.
And so I know that last time we were talking, Uruguay was scoring goals, and that Mr. Wes Schantz, most recently on Bookworm Games, had his parents and asked them about who was going to win the World Cup. And his mom, of course, was rooting for the same team as he was, and his dad was rooting for a team that had already lost. And I wanted to talk a little bit, maybe, and this could be our last topic, a sort of recreational topic, a P at the end of the day, about Quidditch. and some of the
Yeah.
reflections y'all had on that first practice, and the positions of beater, chaser, keeper, and seeker. So 4 positions, and then the 3 sorts of ball. What is it? There are two bludgers that will attack you, and you need the beaters to hit with their bats, and that Fred and George are described themselves as bludgers. So that makes me think of the entire game itself as a creative endeavor, and the bludgers being sort of the insults that get thrown at those who put themselves in the arena, like
Mm-hmm.
Theodore Roosevelt talks about in that very famous quote, which I should read verbatim at some point. It's the he in the arena that matters, not those that try and cut him down, is the gist of it. But also there's the quaffle, which the 3 chasers can throw to each other, which is like a soccer ball, but it's red. The bludgers are black, and the golden snitch is golden with silver wings, and it's as big as a walnut, whereas the quaffle is as big as a soccer ball, and the bludgers are a little smaller. And what is it? The chasers can throw the quaffle through one of the 3 hoops that are 50 feet high, attached to like a long pole, sort of like what young children blow bubbles through, is how it's actually described by the narrator, J.K. Rowling. And you get 10 points at a time when you score against the keeper on one of those 3 hoops. And it seems like you're actually the game is made for you to score, right? 3 hoops and then 3 chasers and only 1 keeper. Seems very unfair. There's constantly going to be a 2-on-1 and 3-on-1 situation, so that can't be the real game. But the sort of deeper underlying game, sort of like the meta game we were talking about with the meta rules, is the seeker has to keep from getting killed and knocked off his broom by all the insults while he does nothing effectively, right? And then once he catches a snitch, he gets 150 points and the game comes to an end. And so, what did y'all think about this game and how it was presented? I know I started beginning some of my thoughts with the bludgers perhaps being insults, but yeah.
Well, I like that idea that it's sort of 2 games in one or more. You know, it's got a surface level of tossing the ball back and forth and getting it through the hoop, and then there's this underlying or overarching game of catching the snitch, which effectively is the only important part of the game as far as winning and losing is concerned, right? Like, it's so much more heavily weighted.
Do you think it relates to the Hogwarts situation in the same way that sort of there's the direct game that we're talking about, winning the House Cup points, graduating, doing the learning on the one hand, that's like the quaffle scoring, but then there are the deeper lessons of like how to build a community and also how to maintain one's own individuality, right? That kind of strikes me as what catching the snitch is. It's not only winning the game in a social, communal way, but becoming your own individual self as well and following your interest. If that's what the golden snitch indicates, following your own path no matter where it takes you, while also winning the social game by not going off the grid, and that those games are actually very different looking and very hard to win. And you win them in different ways.
Right.
It's almost as if it's trying to show you just how complex life really is, that there's the seen and the known that looks so straightforward and simple to navigate, but then there's so much more going on that you and most people don't see, that you have to attempt to recognize if you're going to actually win the real game.
I think that there's also, I mean, right, so like as a game it requires speed, agility, grace, strength, brute strength, even with those bludgers and the bats,
precision,
and
accuracy,
precision, and strategy, right? So like it would be stupid to try and catch the snitch when your team is more than 150 points down, right? So why would you end the game if you're just gonna lose, right? So there's something about the seeker position that while it is like the 150 points and the and the end of the game, like your whole team has to be doing well enough in order for you to go ahead and do your job.
That's
and
true.
like,
that's true. But we will see. Oh yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, and in addition to that, like the seeker doesn't really have much else to defend him or herself with besides their own like flying abilities, but has to rely on the other members of their squad. I hate using that word, but to protect them. And I think that, like, so while it is, I think it is, yeah, hashtag squad goals. So basic. But the like there an individual quest portion that I think like the seeker role represents, and there's the team aspect, but there is a relationship between the team and the individual, and like the individual can't succeed without the team, and the team can't succeed without everybody kind of doing their own individual role really, really well, which is why when you look at Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville, and the four of them, again, another four, like going on this midnight adventure through the hallways, like they're four really different characters, with some with strengths, some with different strengths, some with no strength whatsoever, and they, I think that they get information, and they eventually get home because of all four of them, in a way. You know, like if Neville hadn't fallen, would they have run all the way into this one room where there was the three-headed dog and they realized what the trapdoor was? Mm-mm. I don't know. Like, so it seems, I don't know, I think that that's a really significant part of the game, in addition to the fact that it's like this wonderful collection of all of these like real world, primary world games, so that we can all understand. It's something that like every reader can understand, because we all understand at least one of those sports,
and we all understand games. Like,
yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's significant, like very much, that and that there be some kind of specific game that, like, I don't know, all these kids can rally around. It's a great example of recovery also.
Well, then that makes me, I have a specific question then. Wes, why is this game played on broomsticks with goalposts 50 feet above the ground? What's the reason for that? Does it just make it more exciting to see, or why would it even make it more exciting?
I guess that it has to do with the danger that I think you spoke about a little while ago, that the hero embodying the logos must embrace, right? So it's like for everyone on the pitch or up in the air or whatever, there is this danger which extends up to, I guess, death, or at least being lost in the Sahara Desert if you're the referee. So yeah, I think it's a kind of danger. It's a kind of freedom as well, right? Those two things are completely intermingled.
So so one of Harry's first questions when he learns about the Bludgers is, have they ever killed somebody? And Wood says, well, not at Hogwarts, just a couple of broken jaws. But that makes me wonder, why is this allowed at a school? It doesn't seem like a very safe game at all. It seems very unsafe. And
there are a lot of things that they
the learning.
But I mean, there's a lot of things that they do that aren't safe at this school, right? I mean, like Neville in 1 week, it seemed like he broke his wrist and he got covered in boils, right? Like,
fell to the ground, broke his wrist, melted a cauldron, knocked over a priceless suit of armor, lost his toad.
That doesn't even account for the various emotional landmines of the poor Neville is probably like running into at all times. But I don't know. It reminds me a little bit of something I think we've talked about previously. I know someone that you like, Alex, who I have to admit I'm not the most familiar with this scholar, but I know I listened to a podcast. I listened to the Joe Rogan podcast one time, and it was Dr. Peterson. And I mean, I'm sure that off this podcast, you and I can discuss some of his ideas that I don't really understand. Maybe I don't like. But one of them was this idea that like it's better to make students brave by giving them the opportunity to, in a safe space, not in like the colloquial sense these days, but like in a school, to face dangerous things, so that in the world they can face dangerous things rather than like protect them from dangerous things.
So the opposite of Dolores Umbridge when she teaches dark arts.
Right. I'd see, and that's, I mean, what we'll see in the third is that the most experiential learning that they do in Defense Against the Dark Arts is also their most favorite.
Yes.
And it's interesting that like the thing that is the most predicated upon like the doing of the process of learning is the thing that Hermione is most afraid of. I think it's really interesting that like all four of these kids, and we haven't even talked about poor Seamus, but all four of these kids are in Gryffindor, and yet Harry's bravery is characterized as stupid when he goes to when he like jumps on the troll. Hermione is brave in the classroom, but not on the field. Neville, I don't know what kind of bravery he has demonstrated yet. Maybe
he will eventually show moral bravery.
Right, he will show moral bravery, but I also think like for Neville, like getting up the next morning and doing it again is kind of brave, like for him. And I don't know about Ron. Maybe I'm not impressed with him just yet. We'll put it that way. But like,
but so it seems like you're agreeing that you have to put students in the area of proximal development. You have to put them in the wake of acceptable danger. You have to produce darkness in front of them. You have to let them get up on the broom. You need to let them play Quidditch. And even occasionally you need to let them fight against a troll if unexpectedly it comes up and it's their own moral sense that has them do it in order to save somebody else.
And if you're really afraid of the potential consequences that the students could get into, right? Like then you have a really great healer in Madame Pomfrey. Like it really seems like there's a solution to a lot of these problems, right? And that's maybe part of what makes this school seem really unusual to me, is because I think schools these days, there are increasing amounts of rules about what kids can and can't do that keeps them safe to avoid lawsuits. At least there are at my old school.
Oh, yeah.
And just like an overly like a phobia, a deep institutional phobia of getting in trouble or like pissing off parents, when like there's something to be said for a kid falling down and scraping their knee, or and then like figuring out how to handle it. I don't know, like that seems like a really important is figuring out how to handle that stuff, and it being 50 feet above the air.
3 teachers telling you to get in trouble, and that's an important part of getting up or growing up, but also because it teaches you to deal with the consequences as well.
Well, just to like, I mean, that's what Congressman, what's his name? Congressman John Lewis. That's his line is, you don't get in all kinds of trouble. You just get in good trouble, and then you bear the consequences of it. That's Neville Longbottom, right? You get in good trouble, and you stand in the way of evil. And like if there are consequences and you get arrested for protesting, fine, but you do the thing that's right. And I think that's how you build the important kinds of courage, is by teaching kids that there are consequences to courageous acts. And like, if you want them to be physically brave, you have to practice that. But if you want them to be morally brave, like you have to practice that too. Yeah. And I think that's an important part of, the game itself being 50 feet above the ground. It also makes it like, it reminds me a little bit of hockey, that like, you can play. Yeah. I mean, well, people who are really good at hockey look like they're pretty in control, but it honestly, like being on ice and going around that fast with like basically knives on your feet, like that seems pretty dangerous, and it kind of separates the risk takers from the not risk takers. It demands a certain amount of skill. I don't know.
It's like the physical version of what we do. We're abstracting, we're moving fast, we're careering around, we're not staying in one place, and we're passing the puck to each other. Okay, so one last thought I want to try, and it's not really very well formed, so it's sort of like the troll, lumpy. So I just want to kind of shoot it at you, Wes, because I know you were listening in on the question of danger and its place in the schools, and this is something I talked about in my first lecture, and we've talked about a couple times on at this school, because danger is prevalent at Hogwarts, and so it teaches some important lessons about the world. And I was wondering about the troll. itself, the full-grown mountain troll that we run into, and whether it manifests at that time in the bathroom with Hermione. And I do see a parallelism between Hermione surviving in a bathroom where Moaning Myrtle died in a bathroom with Voldemort. And I don't know if that was consciously done, but I think that's very good. That that's sort of that the troll, and I think this might only be one aspect, not the whole symbolism of it, might have represented the initial shadow projection that Harry and Ron shot onto Hermione, not understanding her nature very well. And that what they confront in the bathroom, the place where you clean yourself up and thus clean up your perceptions, it has mirrors for reflecting in it, as well as water for coming to new understandings, like a baptism or a rebirth of understanding, is that what they got from between each other was that troll that perhaps Hermione had projected rule breakers, unsuccessful, bad onto Ron and Harry, whereas Harry and Ron had projected annoying, know-it-all, like doesn't see the big picture on Hermione, and that they got that projection out from between themselves. And now they can see themselves clearer, and that is what the basis of their true friendship is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I like the troll only is defeated by their sort of like clumsy attempts to help each other. Like they don't have the skill at this point, but they do have the intention to rescue their friend.
Perhaps
and
like
and the
us
troll
now.
isn't. Yeah, well, sure, and that's like you do your best, right? But the troll isn't killed either, which is important, I think. And they don't have the wherewithal to kill the troll, but the teachers come on the scene in time to kind of clean up the mess, you know. So there is still something really important about having the institutional framework around it. There's ultimate wall of safety, which can be breached, but then can sort of come back and clean up the mess.
Very good. Oh,
I
that's
really
excellent.
like that
I guess
idea, Alex.
perhaps that's a prefiguration of, well, certainly of dealing with Fluffy, but also of dealing eventually with the ultimate representation of threat to society in the form of the dragons. Well, I think Sarah.
I was just gonna say that I think what that brings up is like it will be important later, is that rather than attempting to defeat God through like strength, be it intellectual or physical, what's always really surprisingly powerful is attempting to protect good or resist, you know what I mean, like protect another person, and sometimes allows a wizard to do more than they would be able to do when they go head on,
right?
You know, and that's something that's also in the Lord of the Rings, that like you rise above your station, you do greater things in defense of something good or resisting the corruption of bad, rather than like facing the evil force head on, using its own, like, so I don't know if that makes
the charitable
sense,
aspect of it, the notion of sacrifice, of putting the action above oneself, or even another person above oneself, seems to give one access to some to additional strength, to a power that one
I just really like that.
realize. One seems to hit on like the archetypal energy source of the hero in that moment, and can do things that one could not do with more selfish motivations.
I wanted to say, like, hat tip, really like the idea about that. What does the troll represent, and the importance of it being in the bathroom? But I never thought about that. But that's really good.
Well, that seems to be another great reason to be doing these conversations.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's another fantastic conversation. This is our fourth one, and we're past the halfway point of this book. And so, well, if I look at this,
go on. I was gonna say, should we close with like another silly question, like what? Because I don't know, like we said like what house would you be? Or
here's what we can close with then. Okay, so first off, Would you all like to read 11, 12, and 13 for next time? Quidditch, the Mirror of Erised, Desire Backwards, and 13, Nicholas Flamel, who was a real alchemist.
Yeah,
Sure. Well, they should have paid more attention in their history class. They would have figured this out by now.
Yeah, exactly. And so if we're going to do something silly, Sarah, you haven't weighed in on this yet. We have and so the audience should know that we have sort of a group text message that we share things on. I've been sharing funny Harry Potter Hufflepuff stuff lately, and I know we were recently asking you, and Pottermore gave you a suggestion on which house you should be in, Sarah. But Wes and I were talking about what our wands would be after our conversation last week, what they would be made of, and how long they were, and what their cores would be, and an aspect.
Did you do the wand quiz is it a quiz?
No, we just sort of, I think we just sort of used whatever capacity for self-reflection we have at this point. So perhaps we're very wrong, but
Mirror of Erised.
Yeah, Mirror of Erised. But Wes, do you want to start with yours? I really liked your description, and then I can say mine and embarrass myself, and perhaps Sarah can make one up now or come up with one for the next time.
Well, hey,
sure.
Sometimes a wand is just a wand, and that. Okay, so mine, I thought I should have an oak material, and then inside of it, I like the idea of having dragon's heartstrings, and I thought it should be 9 inches, and then it's going to be knobbly, and it's going to be good. It's going to be good for occlumency, which I think is just a fun word.
Yes,
so
the ability to defend your mind, or yes, right. And there's a reverse word that is the ability to try and attack people's minds.
Correct.
And so I had said that mine would be, and so mine, I said 14 inches in the same, because Voldemort's was 13 and a half inches, just to be part of the epic tradition of always one-upping the one who came before, which is something that not only Virgil does with Homer, but Dante does with Virgil, and Milton does also with Virgil and sort of Dante, though he doesn't often engage with Dante, though he did spend time in Florence and so must have known him well. And so, though afterwards, so known his work well. I said 14 inches, redwood, because I was born in San Francisco. And something interesting about redwood is that it's sturdy and can survive in almost any climate. So people like to build with redwood, with a core of unicorn hair and a lot of whip to it. So a lot of snap. But yeah, that's what my Mirror of Erised version of the wand.
Okay. Well, so I've taken the Pottermore quiz on what my wand is. So I can tell you, if I hadn't, I think I took the quiz maybe 4 or 5 years ago, because I don't remember answering any of these questions recently. But if I had to, off the top of my head, I'd pick my favorite tree is a pine tree. They're evergreen, which to me means they are obviously they're green all the time, but they're constant. They smell nice, though it's really hot in DC, so I can't promise that that's true right now. But they remind me of Christmas, and that's one of my favorite times of the year. I would want my core to be a phoenix feather, because I think phoenixes are one of the most independent and yet strong, beautiful in not weakness, but beautiful in their sacrificial capacity. I don't think we ever see more than one phoenix in the entire story, but their greatest strength comes in their service to others. And I think on my best days, that's the kind of life that I would aspire to. But I also can be fairly kind of alone, and I like being alone. And I don't know. I mean, what's the middle length? We'll go with 11 inches.
Lily's was 10 and a half.
Lily's was 10 and a half. Fine, I'll be 10 and a half, because she had red hair and I have red hair. And yeah, I mean, I think mine would be flexible, but not that what did you call it? It doesn't have wit to it. Like, but like, not like open to like willing to change, but also like pine, something like real and true.
Perhaps it smells slightly different for each season.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for sure.
Well, that's wonderful.
There you go.
Well,
I don't think that there are any pine wands in this world, but
11-inch pine, flexible but not whipping. And
yes.
All right, with Phoenix feather core. Well, we're doing
Phoenix
important work
core,
here.
yeah.
We're doing important work here. Well, this is wonderful, and another great conversation, and I hope to talk to y'all soon, maybe even as soon as Saturday. I know that recently Wes started editing the History of Western Thought page, and so his materials are going to show up there more, and he already started posting stuff, and that's already been great for moving things around. And maybe if you ever want to do that too, Sarah, you can do that as well. And
awesome.
It's just, we're in motion, and we're moving, and we're doing great things, and well, let's keep it up. See y'all next time.
Sounds good.
Until next time.
Okay. Take it easy. Have a good 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July. Of course, it's the 4th of July. We're talking British literature, but perhaps ironically.
Happy Treason Day. No,
everyone loves fireworks. It's fine.
Again, following the meta rules rather than the rules themselves.
Right.
All right. I'll see y'all later.
All right. Take it easy. See you guys.
Bye.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.